It's raining oil in Russia. And no, that's not a figure of speech. I'm talking about real toxic black rain, actually falling right now over a Russian city called Tuapse. Residents are filming themselves running their fingers over the roof and showing a black layer of oil. The cars are covered in dark spots. The coastal birds are dying. The city's smoke is visible from space. And all of this happened because weeks ago, Ukrainian drones crossed 1,000 kilometers of Russian territory and detonated one of the country's largest oil refineries. But Tuapse is just one city. In another part of Russia, another refinery is burning. In another, more Russian one. 16 out of the 38 major refineries in the country have already been hit, and in at least 57 out of 83 Russian regions, gasoline is running out. Let's go back to Tuapse for a moment, because what happened there helps to understand the scale of this problem. Tuapse is a port city on the Black Sea coast, with about 60,000 inhabitants, known for its beaches, its quiet pace of life, and its tourists. There was one of the 10 largest refineries in Russia there, operated by Rosneft, which processed 12 million tons of oil per year. Notice the verb tense. Had. In 2 weeks, Ukrainian drones hit that refinery 3 times in a row. Before one plume of smoke cleared, the next one came. The firefighters barely finished one job before they were already rushing to the next. The result is that the refinery suspended operations for an indefinite period. 24 storage tanks were destroyed. A 7-kilometer oil slick spread across the Black Sea. And local environmentalists have already called it the biggest environmental disaster in the region in recent years. 24 tanks. At once. And it didn't stop there. The smoke from the Tuapse fire was so thick that it spread along the entire Russian Black Sea coast. It reached Anapa. It reached Sochi. Yes, Sochi. The resort where Putin himself has a summer residence, where the Russian elite goes to relax. The air there became heavy, dark, with the smell of burnt oil. The war that Putin started in 2022 now reeks in his own nostrils. For 3 years, it was Ukraine that had cities in flames, civilians crying in front of the camera, smoke rising from the horizon. Now the smoke is rising from the other side, and Tuapse is just one of the stories. On April 26th, Ukrainian drones crossed hundreds of kilometers and hit the Yaroslavl refinery, which has the capacity to process 15 million tons of oil per year. On the Baltic coast, the ports of Primorsk and Ust-Luga, which together account for more than 40% of Russia's oil exports, lost 40 and 30% of their storage tanks respectively. Satellite images confirm the destruction. And Ukrainian attacks are already reaching Siberia, 1,700 kilometers from the border. Russia simply no longer has a safe rear area. But the worst thing for Putin isn't what's burning inside the refineries. It's what's happening at the gas stations. Russia loves to call itself an energy superpower. Well, now the energy superpower is out of gasoline. In more than 57 of Russia's 83 regions, drivers are lining up for hours at gas stations to fill their tanks. In several places, rationing has been imposed. Each customer can only buy 10, 20, or 30 liters, depending on the city. In Moscow, Lukoil, the country's second largest oil producer, has banned the sale of gasoline in cans to prevent people from stockpiling at home. In occupied Crimea, half of the gas stations have simply run dry. Then comes a detail that sounds like a bad joke. Russia, the world's third largest oil producer, is now importing gasoline from China and Belarus. Yes, Russia sells crude oil to China. China refines it and sends it back as gasoline. And Russia pays. Now, back to the story. All of this, mind you, is being done by a country that 2 years ago was considered a lost cause by the Western media itself. They talked about the fall of Kyiv, about a collapse of morale, about surrender. Therefore, the inevitable question is this: how did Ukraine, without an air force, without a navy, without industrial capacity comparable to Russia, manage to build a machine of destruction capable of burning down the oil industry of Europe's biggest energy power? Putin was certain that the gigantic size of Russia, with its 17 million square kilometers, would serve as a shield. That the heart of the oil industry deep inside the territory would always be out of reach. That was his main bet. And it was exactly this bet that Ukraine destroyed. The drones that are doing all this are not generic. Each one has its own identity, its own profile, and a curious story behind it. The first one is called Lyuty, a Ukrainian word that means fierce or furious. The Ukrainians nicknamed this drone the poor man's Tomahawk because it does what a $3 million American cruise missile does, but it costs around $200,000. It has a range of over 1,000 kilometers and carries a warhead of up to 75 kilograms. And it was designed to be a direct response to the Iranian Shahed drone, which Russia imports to attack Ukraine. The second is the Bobber, which in Ukrainian means beaver. This one has already flown all the way to Moscow and can hit targets 800 kilometers away. But the star of the show, the drone that's truly changing this war, goes by the simple name FP1. Here's where the story becomes truly absurd. The FP1 is basically made out of plywood. It costs $55,000 per unit. Ukraine produces 100 of them per day. 100 per day, every day. And it accounts for about 60% of all Ukrainian attacks deep inside Russia. A wooden drone cheaper than a used car is setting fire to the oil industry of a superpower. And this is where the math starts to turn against Putin. Think about it with me. Each FPV drone costs $55,000. Each Russian anti-aircraft missile from the S-400 system, which is what Putin uses to try to shoot down these drones, costs around $1 million. On a single night, a recent night, April 28th, Russia claimed to have shot down 186 Ukrainian drones. Do the math. If each interception used up an S-400 missile Russia spent in a single night $186 million to defend itself. Ukraine, on the other hand, spent about $10 million. And even so, several drones got through. The Tuapse refinery caught fire again. That's the equation that's breaking the Kremlin. For every wooden drone that Putin needs to shoot down, he has to burn extremely expensive missiles that take months to manufacture in Russian factories that have also already been attacked. And as if that weren't enough, the Ukrainian strategy isn't just to destroy, it's to keep things destroyed. The Volgograd refinery, for example, has already been hit 5 times in 2 months. Every time the Russians finish the repairs, the next attack comes. Putin went so far as to send army reservists with rifles in hand to guard refineries against drones flying hundreds of meters above. Imagine the scene: a Russian soldier with a rifle on the ground waiting for a drone to fly by up in the sky. We are in 2026. Not in 1944.
34.
As you can see, every missile that Putin burns to shoot down a plywood drone is a missile he doesn't have to use against Ukraine. Every billion spent on defense is a billion less for the front lines. The math isn't just embarrassing, it's actually bleeding the Russian budget dry. And the numbers are frightening. Just in the month of March 2026, Russia lost $2.3 billion in oil revenue. The number comes from Zelensky himself, citing Western intelligence data. 40% of the extra profit that Putin would have made from the global oil price surge caused by the war between the United States and Iran simply evaporated in the fires at Ukrainian refineries. The Russian budget for 2026 projects a deficit of $100 billion. To cover this gap, Putin has just done something he avoided throughout the entire war. He raised the value-added tax from 20 to 22%. In other words, the average Russian who goes grocery shopping, fills up the car, pays rent, now pays more taxes to cover the losses caused by Ukrainian drones. It was Putin who invaded Ukraine. It's the Russian people who are paying the price. But there's a part of this story that almost nobody tells. And it's perhaps the most revealing of all. The Ukrainian campaign against Russian oil in March 2026 was so efficient, so devastating, that something absurd happened. Not even Ukraine's own friends could believe the extent of the damage. Western allies, in private conversations with Kyiv, asked Zelensky to slow down the pace of the attacks. The reason was simple. The damage to Russian production was starting to affect the price of oil on the global market. And that was driving up inflation in several countries. Zelensky went public and acknowledged the request. Kyiv's allies, the same ones who have been sending weapons for 3 years, were concerned about the extent of the damage. They were asking Ukraine to stop burning Russia. Think about this scenario. For 3 years, Ukraine begged for more weapons, more help, greater scale. Now, in 2026, it's the allies who are worried about how far Ukraine can reach, and Zelensky said no. The damage, and the most interesting thing is that the allies' response to that no was the opposite of what was expected. Rather than increase pressure, they spent money. The Netherlands announced 248 million euros for Ukrainian drone production. Belgium, 85 million. Norway signed a co-production agreement. Germany went further. On April 14th in Berlin, it signed with Ukraine the largest defense agreement between the two countries in 20 years. 4 billion euros, including Patriot missiles, Iris-T anti-aircraft systems, and more than $350 million, specifically allocated for the production of Ukrainian deep strike drones. The reason? The Lyudi and the FP1 manufactured in Ukraine are more effective against Russia dollar for dollar than practically any off-the-shelf weapon in the European arsenal. Europe has realized that Ukraine has built from scratch, in 3 years of war, one of the most dangerous long-range drone industries on the planet. And Europe is paying for it to continue. And that's why this story isn't going to end anytime soon. The International Energy Agency in Paris projected that the impact of these attacks should continue to suppress Russian refining at least until mid-2026. And look, that's an optimistic estimate. The Russian oil industry is not collapsing all at once. It's dying little by little, refinery by refinery, one plume of smoke at a time. And this is where the story goes back to where it started. It goes back to that person at the peak, running their finger along the roof and showing the layer of oil that covers their house. That black stain on her finger, well, it's the same oil that Putin uses to fund his war. It's raining back in his backyard. And that's exactly why this story is worth following. In your opinion, how long can Russia withstand this pace of attacks before something big finally breaks? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If this video helped you understand what's really happening in this war, give us some support here. Share it with that friend who still thinks Russia is winning. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I'll see you in the next one.